Hello and welcome to Bunny Hop. My name is George Weedman and I've got with me Guillaume Provost, who was the creative director on Contrast, which was actually one of my favorite games this year, so that's quite an honor. I mean, thanks for showing up and whatnot. How are things going tonight?
They're going pretty good.
So Contrast has made it out, and I, for one, really liked it, but I don't know, it didn't exactly get like universal critical praise or reception. I mean, how do you feel about it now that it's out and on the market in the world? Did it lead up to your expectations?
No, I think it's fair to say that we thought we would get a little bit of a better treatment from the press that we did. The flip side, is the game did come out with a number of issues, and I think we understand quite rightly that the reviewers were disappointed and at sometimes frustrated, just like some of the users the first week as well. When you make something different, you have to break some eggs. So I'd say I'm a little bit different. I'm disappointed that we didn't get as much recognition for the innovation portions and the experimental nature of the game. But I'm proud of what I did. I'm at peace with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess one thing I noticed when I was playing through it and made my review when it eventually came out was like kind of a heavier focus on like the artistic merits of the story and whatnot. Like I really enjoyed how you guys used the like greater metaphorical implications of the core gameplay mechanic, which was phasing in and out of shadows, into a really interpretive and experimental story. And I don't know, do you feel there's like some kind of priority amongst regular review culture to look at technical aspects rather than artistic aspects of a game?
No, I think some of the comments that we got in reviews were fair. There were some bugs that shipped when the game released that caused players to lose significant amounts of gameplay. And the only thing that saddens me is that obviously the first thing that we did when we realized there were problems with the game is to go in and fix them. And I think that the game experience today, without the glitches that we experienced in the first 2 weeks of launch, it's quite good. It's fair and square. We made some mistakes, and the reviewers caught us on it. It's too bad because the product is a nice product, and I would hope that as many players as possible get to experience it. So.
And I think one of the things that I also thought was kind of cool and unique, I guess, about the game, and also really kind of impressive, is how you guys were a small team of 7 people, but still managed to release on multiple platforms. And at the launch of a next-gen platform, actually, it was also a launch title for PlayStation 4. And I was wondering if, in order to juggle so many different releases at the same time, did you have to make any compromises to make that happen?
Yes, I mean, obviously, I think to a certain extent it did do a number of things. It took our eyes off the player experience for too long near the end of the project because we were too busy doing certification requirements on a lot of the consoles at the time. And it's a funny rule that I thought I'd learned and been banged upon year after year after year, is to make sure that, even though you've played your game to death and you really have a feeling you have a good pulse to it, to keep doing so all the way up till the moment that you ship. And it's something that we didn't quite do in the last few weeks of the product cycle. We did a lot of creative compromises during the project to kind of make sure that the scope of what we were trying to accomplish was achievable by a small team, however. And I think some of those constraints actually turned into a strength. And a good example of that is actually the way that we tell a story in Contrast. So when you run around in Contrast, you see a lot of the characters by bringing them to light, because you actually only see them through their shadows. And this is something that fit really well and coherently into the project for a number of reasons, because we could use it for gameplay, where basically once the characters are in shadows and you can walk on shadows, well, now you can walk on the characters while they're doing stuff. We could frame it well within the context of who Don was and who Dee Dee was for the 2 main characters in the game. And it looked like this beautifully architected, design decision, but it didn't really originate that way. It originated as us sitting down as a group and saying, there's no freaking way we can do facial animations and all these crazy AAA stuff in a team of 7 people. What are the ways in which we can simplify the work? So again, it's a good example of us, trying to turn the constraints of a small team into, something that would help propel the game into something that was unique and different.
And that's one thing I noticed at first glance of Contrast. I was really surprised to see that it was $15 when I feel like when you look at this game, it doesn't look like a $15 game at first glance. It's like a Unreal Engine 3. You got some fancy lighting effects going on, and it's not like a 2D side-scroller type situation. And it's just, in order to like meet the ambitions of the game that you were going at, were there any other things that had to be streamlined or I guess maybe compromised or simplified to make ends meet?
We were stubborn, both on on the financial side. I mean, there's a lot of hardships, right? I worked on the project for 4.5 years. 2 of those years we spent doing a lot of grunt work on bigger projects to kind of accumulate capital. We we certainly had to. I mean, the biggest problem with Contrast that we encountered during the production phase was that it was a title that was creatively ambitious. It wasn't the visual effects or the visual quality or the quality of the soundtrack that was the difficult part. It was really that we were not making a derivative game. I mean, some games had been done with some shadows, like Lost in Shadows is a good example. Some games had been done in shadows before, but no one had ever tried really bridging both dimensions in a seamless manner like we do. And it's a pretty complicated mechanic to wrap your head around when you're making a game.
I think I saw a demo you did at PAX where you showed off like invisible character meshes that were casting shadows on the wall.
Yeah.
What sort of challenges are involved in designing levels around making sure that those invisible things that you can't see are casting things that you can see and that everything lines up properly?
Well, you can't draw it on paper.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's just something you can draw on paper. No, because the lights and contrast are all omnidirectional. So basically, the shadows get bigger as they grow away from the wall and smaller as they grow further closer to the light. So it's not like a linear thing that you can just draw on paper. I'm going to make my puzzle and it's going to look like that. We really had to actually, write down the ideas on paper, like the types of objects that we wanted to use, and we really had to go into the editor and actually try them out
So you
to
had to
see whether they're going to work.
draft out the ideas themselves in the level editor?
Yeah, there was no other way to do it. Just unless you can think in projected space in your head, like there's no other. And it's not just that the light projects, but it also projects on surfaces, and the surfaces can be curved. I mean, the carousel, for example, is a great example of that. There's a place where there's this carousel that's projecting shadows on a wall, but the wall's curved, right? So it's a lot of different dimensions to think about. And when we were writing the control scheme for Contrast, we ran into all kinds of issues about like how the shadow should move across the wall for it to be intuitive. We ran into issues, for example, of like, you can stand on firm ground even if there's no shadow, but you're skimming across walls, but you don't want to start getting blocked by visual details on the walls, for example. So we had to start standardizing like the width of the actual windows to make sure they didn't block the character's passage through it. So it was really it's an intricate design because the gameplay is affected by the visuals and the visuals are affected by the gameplay. So every time we make a decision on the way the mechanics were going to work, we needed to actually think about what impact it would have on the visual style of the game as well.
What inspired the shadow phasing mechanic? How did that idea come about?
When I was at Arcane, I was at a company called Arcane Studios before starting on the project, and I did not work on, but I did witness the guys at Valve final the Orange Box, and I was very, very inspired by Portal. So the mechanic is really what came first in the project. It wasn't the context or the story or the visuals or the sounds. And I wanted to study study a different way of moving through space. And so yeah, so I really thought about what my personal strengths were, and I'd been a rendering programmer when I was younger, um, and yeah, I thought of the original concept at the time of mixing shadows with physics. And to some credit, there was quite a few other people in the industry who thought the same way. This is something that I've encountered a few times in my industry, is that once games and technology reach a certain point, you get a lot of ideas that are similar that pop out at the same time. And a month after like literally, Shadow Physics came out, Lost in Shadows came out, and what it did is it turned just a simple, it forced me to kind of back out in the corner and say, okay, well, these other games are doing work in the same space that I wanted to work in, and I needed to make that call to say, okay, well, do I abandon this idea and go with a different concept that is more original, or do I turn this idea and I make it my own and turn it into something that's unique enough that no matter what comes out, and this to me was the best defense, right? In that kind of situation, is to just like look at it objectively and turn the original mechanic into an entire experience that made it unique in its own right. But that's kind of the pathway that we went through. And from the mechanic, when we discussed context, film noir was kind of the first obvious inspiration because, from a photography and lighting perspective, it's been it's used shadows traditionally to tell a story.
And I actually think it's really interesting that you mentioned Portal 2, because when I was playing through Contrast, I got a Portal-esque feeling, because it was messing with the way I've been trained when playing other games to look at environments. In Portal, you don't look for a way out of a room, you look for intersecting walls aimed at each other so you can portal out of a room, and in Contrast, you're looking at the shadows on the wall instead of the doors leading out of the room. And it's also like really strong with theming too, which I think is really important. With the way the shadows intersect with the storyline. Like you have a little girl character who kind of drives the plot more so than the actual main character, and she's seeing a very like adult world that she doesn't. This is my interpretation, anyways, and I'm just wondering how valid it is that she's seeing an adult world she doesn't fully understand. So instead, she sees shadows of it.
Well, I don't want to. I've always refused to spill the beans on. We definitely did have like a rather clear explanation within the team about how that worked. I guess I could this no I guess this one part I could say is that yeah, like Dawn, the main character that you're playing, is the is in some ways the reflection of an imaginary character for Dee Dee. And Dee Dee, the little girl, is bridging two worlds, which is the world of the world of reality that she sees, on a day-to-day basis with her parents and the people that she sees, and her. I'm going to put quotes on imaginary here, but her imaginary character, which is you. So
the ending, you see like this other secondary character, Vincenzo, kind of bridge that gap, but he does it in a way that like turns him into a 3D model like Dee Dee, so you can't really. Or like Dawn, I mean, so you can't really like tell
you better
what Dee Dee was seeing this whole time.
You better put spoiler notes on that.
I will. It's just
yeah. Again, the story development was that was definitely a portion that was very personal to me on many fronts. And again, I mean, I make it sound like we were all organized, and this was like perfect. This perfect design process that was very methodical, which it wasn't actually because of the experimental nature of the game. We took a lot of zigzags on it, more than I'd have wanted. But we went from the mechanic to the setting, and the setting to the story. And when it came down for me and Alex, the writer on the project, to talk about. What kind of story we wanted to layer into the game to make the experience meaningful. I was a single parent. So I'm a single parent. I have two daughters, and I was really curious to explore a number of topics, amongst which the subject of parenthood and fatherhood, and the subject of separation as well, and what a child goes through in that process. So I'm not telling my own story. There's some corollaries.
I was about to
A
ask.
game studio is a little bit like a circus sometimes, no, I'm not telling my personal story. But one of the things that I was trying to explore in the game is the feelings of a young girl seeing things that are or witnessing and experiencing events in her life that are sometimes a little bit more difficult to comprehend. So I think we've partially succeeded in it. In contrast, it's one of those things that, in order to deliver on at the same level as, say, The Last of Us, you need millions and millions of dollars to do. But I think within the scope means that we did a pretty good job at trying to convey that concept in the game.
Do you think it's easier to focus on narrower topics when you have a smaller team like that?
Um, yeah, I think it's easier to focus on something that's different to make you stand out, but you also need to focus, on a specific, I think, topic in order to get that, done really, really well. Um, yeah, it's a at the same time, we didn't. It would have been easy for us to. We definitely were ambitious on a number of fronts. Like we didn't want to be like, and I love that game, by the way. I'm not down shooting it at all, but we didn't want to become like an interactive story game, right? Like we did want to have some gameplay built into the story. We did want to tell a different type of story. We wanted to use different types of mechanics, and we wanted to marry all of that in kind of a cohesive environment. Um, so there's a lot of ambition to chew on and trying to do all those things at the same time. Um, but I'm quite happy with the end result. I feel
Yeah.
like it does reflect those levels of ambitions.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my reading of the game, I just came away from it seeing shadiness in everything. Like, not only from the way that the shadow phasing was involved with making like cool level designs, cool platforming that you can do, but also giving the story a cool interpretive slant with this girl just having a really shady interpretation of everything, and then the plot itself, like. You say you're not going to spill the beans of the actual logistics for how the shadow world actually works. It's all very interpretive and hazy, and the whole ambience of the levels too were it was very very gray, almost like Silent Hill and New Orleans maybe, I don't know. But yeah, anyways, I guess to actually ask a question anyways. Um Another thing I noticed, gosh, it sounds like I'm totally lip servicing it, but I really enjoyed Contrast. I liked how weren't any like nefarious mustache twirling villains. Everyone was kind of juggling their aspirations from their obligations, and the conflicts resulted from that. And no one was really rationalizing the bad stuff they were doing. And did you like really intend to buckle literary tradition with this story?
No.
Is that a happy side effect?
No. Well, yes and no. I mean, classical literary tradition, no. When Alex and I sat down to write the story, we were very clearly not making a story about the lost princess, of a forgotten prophecy trying to save the world.
There's kind of a parody of that in
Right.
Contrast, weirdly enough.
But the I think we didn't what we wanted is, and this is one of the things that I when I talked with Alex and Sylvia the animator on the team, that I really wanted to push through, is that none of the characters, other perhaps with the exception of Dee Dee, which is a child, but none of the characters in Contrast are perfect, right? I didn't want like the good guy and the bad guy, because that didn't feel like what real life is like, and I think there was a reflection of me of wanting to juxtapose these characters that would have been in real life, dealing with problems that might not shatter the entire world, but dealing with real problems that were interpersonal problems between them. And yeah, it's very yeah. Parents are not perfect, Kids are not perfect. I mean, we recorded, bratty lines for Dee Dee for a while. We ended up not putting them in the game because players found her a little annoying. But again, it was that intent to kind of build like that authenticity into the characters, even while retaining certain stereotypes. So obviously, Kat is the femme fatale in the game. She's very inspired by,
Oh, and you also had the two gangsters who were just like, they were so gangster.
yeah, but that's exactly, well, that's one of the problems that we ran into early on we couldn't be too subtle in the depiction or style or archetypes of the characters because you don't actually see them. So because you only see the silhouettes needed to be really well defined, and you needed to get the gist of the character almost immediately by seeing, the silhouette of the character. Yeah, I don't know. It's no. So to answer your earlier question, we weren't trying to shatter any kind of literary convention with it. But yeah, we wanted to try to tell like a story that was. It's not a really complicated story. I didn't try to tell a really complicated story, and it wasn't my intent. But it's a story that deals with topics that aren't normally covered in video games, and I think that to me is an achievement.
And you're also seeing it through an interesting perspective that you don't get very often. Like, you're the imaginary friend of a little girl, which means that everything you see may or may not be questionable, and the ending throws a wrench into all of that.
You should have seen what it was like to pitch that to big wig publishers.
Did you try? Oh, wait, because you did ultimately get published under Focus on
Yes,
some of the platforms, but not all of them?
that's right. Yeah, Focus is a European partner who helped us a lot. Actually, they were great partners. They helped us push the game on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox, which does or did the Xbox 360, which did require an actual publisher at the time. Like we couldn't get on that platform without a publisher. And but we certainly pitched the game for years before that, and we had some quite interesting reactions when we told people like, "Yeah, you play the imaginary friend of a little girl." It's one of those things that until you see it, you don't get it, right? And that's fair.
How reliable of a formula?
But the beautiful thing is I feel much more confident now about pitching crazy story ideas. Like if I went out and I pitched, okay, you're going to be like, I don't know, we're going to make a zombie classical, a zombie musical game, for example. Like people probably wouldn't think I'm quite as crazy now as they did 3 years ago.
So when you did end up on the PS4, though, were you guys self-publishing on the PS4?
Yes.
Or was
so
that also Focus?
no. So we're publishing independently on the PS4, and we're hoping also to publish independently on the Xbox One. And we're like everyone else on the planet, trying to get some info on the Steam box.
So, just to set the record straight, like you are self-publishing on the Xbox One. That's a thing.
Oh, that Microsoft will be the one to announce that. When they see the game running and they say, yeah, we'll put it through, then we'll be able to say, yeah, we'll put it through. But we are working on that at the moment.
So, cool. Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Again, like I said, Contrast was one of my favorite games of this year, so that was really fun to talk about the story and the development and all sorts of crazy stuff that may or may not be behind the scenes involving the actual logistics of the weirdness of the game being explained. But anyways, is there anything else you want to add before we head out?
No, I mean, like maybe the one thing is we've had a lot of popular support from the community, the Greenlight community, especially on Steam, was one of the earliest community to get excited about the game, and it would have never seen the day of light if it wasn't for those people. So,
are you seeing a lot of juxtaposition between like user reviews and critical reviews?
No, I mean, like on Metacritic on PC, for example, we have a critically acclaimed game from the users, and a very different perspective from the reviewers. And we also reached out to PlayStation 4 users on Reddit recently, and we've had hundreds of thousands of players play it on that platform so far. And the feedback that I've gotten is really, really positive. I think players that are either experiencing the glitch-free version of the game
Well,
that is now available are
all
really
patched now, right?
yeah, it is. Yeah, or at least anything that, I mean, I'm sure there's still some problems with the game. I won't, claim that there's a game that doesn't have any bugs, but the problems that the users had a big qualm with are all gone now, and the user feedback that we're getting has been really and incredibly positive. Whether it's on Steam or on Xbox or on PS4. So
Yeah.
that's a piece that warms my heart, and it's what keeps us going to make another wacky, crazy game for another 2 years.
Well, sign me up. I mean, if you guys do end up going through with that, I'll be looking forward to it. But yes, thank you, man. Have a good night. I really appreciate it. And for anyone who's on the fence watching the video, I'm going to direct you guys to Contrast. I highly recommend it. I had a really enjoyable time with it. It's on everything. It's only $15. It's only 3 hours long. It won't waste your time either. So check this game out and have a good night.